In the parched lands east of the Nile, where the desert met the gold-tipped palaces of Wasset, the people spoke in whispers of a cruel tradition. When droughts came and the river gods slept, lesser villages paid tribute to the Theban court grain, cattle, and sometimes daughters. Layali was one such offering. 17, with bronze skin that shimmered like river stone and eyes dark as coal-lined secrets. She was bound in white linen and escorted by guards who dared not meet her gaze. Her village wept in silence as she passed, for to be given to the court was not honor, it was disappearance. She had not cried, not when her mother cut her hair short as a sign of mourning, not when her father turned away, unable to watch. Only her little brother had chased the caravan for miles, shouting her name until the desert swallowed his voice. At the gates of the Theban palace, she stood like a statue carved of defiance. But no one noticed, not the scribes noting her arrival, nor the high priest who cast lots to determine her fate, until he appeared. Menmaatre, a foreigner by birth, a healer by trade, and an exile in the Theban court, tolerated only because of the miracles he'd wrought in the House of Life. Tall and sun-browned, with eyes that held both storms and sorrow, Menmaatre saw more than just a tribute girl. He saw fire where others saw sacrifice. "She's unfit," he said coldly to priest. "Ill, favored, a wasting sickness." The priest scoffed, but dared not challenge him openly. The court owed Menmaatre their lives after the plague last spring. With a wave of his hand, she was taken to his quarters not as a servant, not as a concubine, but as something unspoken. That night, Layali stared at the walls painted with lotus and falcons. She didn't know why he'd lied. She didn't trust him. But in the silence between them, something ancient stirred like the Nile rising unseen in the night. He brought her food, not commands, blankets, not bindings. For the first time in days, her heart beat not in fear, but in wonder. She was given as tribute, but one man had refused to let her go. The House of Life stood apart from the grand palaces and bustling temples of Thebes, nestled behind papyrus gardens and pools of sacred lotus. It was a place where whispers turned to prayers and herbs to healing. Layali had never seen such peace in a city known for power and punishment. Menmaatre's chambers were unlike the golden halls of the court. There were no servants, no incense-heavy air, just scrolls, salves, and silence. The healer moved with purpose, his hands stained with oils and resins, his linen robe simple but clean. He never asked her name, he already knew it. "Layali," he said that morning as she sat quietly on her reed mat. "It means night, but you belong to the day." She did not answer. Her tongue felt dry, her voice unused. She watched him grind blue lotus into paste, the scent unfamiliar yet calming. He treated a priest with a broken ankle, wrapped herbs for a servant coughing blood, and instructed a young scribe on anatomy, never once acknowledging her presence again. But she watched, she studied. And when the sun had climbed to its peak, she quietly stood and handed him a jar he'd been reaching for without a word. Their eyes met. His didn't hold gratitude. They held warning. "This place is safe for now," he said, "but it won't be forever. The court does not forget tributes." That night, he gave her a simple task, crushing dried henna leaves. Her fingers trembled at first, unsure if she was allowed to obey or if this was some new game of the palace. But when he said nothing, just nodded once. She worked in silence beside him. Slowly, she began to feel something she hadn't since leaving her village: useful. Not bartered, not offered, but useful. And with each crushed leaf, each completed task, she felt the stone around her chest crack just a little. Menmaatre never asked about her past. He never touched her. He gave her space and time. In the shadows of the great city, hidden in a house meant for the dying, Layali began to live again. But the Nile was watching, and the gods were never still for long. The tribute girl was safe, for now. But safety in Thebes was never without cost. Thebes breathed with secrets. Behind its alabaster columns and painted walls, every step left an echo. Every whisper carried weight. In the Hall of Eyes, so named for the hundreds of carved falcons, cats, and gods staring from the walls, rumors moved like wind through linen. Layali's name had returned, not as a forgotten tribute, but as the healer's girl. "He hides her," murmured a temple guard. "No sickness took her. That girl is untouched." The priesthood grew restless. Menmaatre, once their reluctant savior, was now a thorn buried deep in the court's pride. It wasn't just that he'd broken tradition. It was that he'd done it openly, challenged their judgment, saved what was meant to be sacrificed. In the House of Life, Layali felt the shift. The air grew tense. Menmaatre spoke less. He watched the horizon more. Scrolls vanished from the shelves. Herbs were dried and packed. Something was changing. And still, he told her nothing. One morning, a woman arrived, elderly, hunched, with eyes like shattered glass. "She was a dream reader," Menmaatre whispered. "She sees what others refuse to." Layali watched as the old woman placed her fingers on a copper bowl filled with water and stared at the ripples. "The girl must leave," she said after long silence. "A choice will come. Fire or flood. One will destroy her. The other will free her." Layali's breath caught. She wanted to ask what it meant, but the dream reader had already vanished into the halls. That night, she found Menmaatre sitting beside the moonlit pool, staring into the reflection of stars. "You saved me," she said finally. Her voice cracked like dry earth, but it carried. "Why?" He didn't look at her. "Because no one else did." A pause. "And because the gods don't choose only kings." But even as he spoke, torches flickered outside the sanctuary walls. Heavy feet marched closer. The court had waited long enough. The tribute they gave was owed. And what was once mercy now looked like defiance. Layali backed away from the window. Her safety had been borrowed. Her freedom, a lie, wrapped in healing robes. Tomorrow, the Hall of Eyes would turn its gaze fully upon her. And Menmaatre would be forced to decide, protect her or protect himself. At dawn, the city of Thebes stirred beneath a crimson sky. The priests came first, draped in ivory linen, heads shaved, eyes sharp with judgment. Behind them marched guards in bronze, their spears clinking in rhythm with the beat of the high priest's staff. They came not as men of faith, but as agents of the old order. Layali stood behind a curtain of woven papyrus, watching them enter the House of Life. Menmaatre greeted them calmly, hands stained with myrrh, as if they had come seeking healing, but they had come for her. "Return the tribute," the high priest said. "The offering belongs to the temple." She was marked. Menmaatre did not bow. She is not a vessel to be filled and emptied. She is not yours. The air thickened. One guard stepped forward. Layali's breath caught in her throat, but before the man could move further, Menmaatre raised a hand. "I invoke the right of Khnum," he said. The chamber froze. The ancient law, rarely spoken, allowed a healer to claim sanctuary over one who aided in sacred service. It was rarely honored, and even more rarely defied. "You disgrace the gods," hissed the priest. Menmaatre replied, "Then let them strike me down." Silence. Long. Dangerous. Then, with a sharp motion, the priest turned. 3 days, he said over his shoulder. Then we come again with, or without, your false sanctity. When they were gone, Layali stepped into the chamber. Her legs trembled. "You could have given me to them," she whispered. "Why didn't you?" Menmaatre's gaze was tired, but unwavering. "Because chains given by priests are no different than chains forged by kings. You deserve your own fate." He handed her a satchel. "We leave tonight." The sun dipped below the city walls as Menmaatre prepared herbs, bandages, maps. Layali stood in silence, heart a storm of gratitude and fear. Outside, the people prayed to the gods for blessings they no longer believed in. But inside the healer's sanctuary, 2 fugitives prepared to challenge an empire. They would not wait for judgment. They would shape it. The tribute girl was no longer waiting to be saved. She was ready to run. And this time, she wouldn't be alone. The road out of Thebes was not carved in stone, but in shadows. Menmaatre led Layali through forgotten corridors beneath the House of Life passages once used by priests fleeing plague, now reclaimed by dust and silence. Torches flickered along the sandstone walls, casting long, trembling shadows of gods carved in eternal watch. Sekhmet, lion-headed goddess of war and healing, loomed in every mural they passed. Her eyes, burning with divine fire, followed them like a judgment yet to come. "She both destroys and heals," Menmaatre whispered, tracing a hand along her likeness. "Just like truth." Outside the sanctuary, the city blazed with torchlight. The priests had called for public ritual, a veil for their hunt. By morning, the story would spread. A healer had corrupted a tribute, stolen her from the gods, broken sacred order. But Menmaatre had planned for this. He had contacts in the workers' quarter, stonecutters and scribes who owed him more than coin. A barge awaited them by a hidden canal gate, its oars wrapped in cloth to silence the water. But reaching it would be no simple task. Through narrow alleys, they moved like ghosts. Layali, once wrapped in white linen, now wore rough homespun and a dyed shawl to mask her face. Menmaatre had darkened his robes with soot and earth, hiding the healer behind the guise of a tradesman. Every step forward was a risk. Every glance from a stranger, a threat. The gods were watching, but so were the spies of the court. They reached the canal just before moonrise. The barge floated still, its pilot silent beneath a reed hat. But as they stepped aboard, a shout rang out. A guard patrol. Metal clanged. "Stop them!" came the cry. Layali froze, but Menmaatre pulled her down, whispering, "Now!" The boat launched into the Nile's dark arms, vanishing into papyrus and mist. Arrows sliced the air, but none found flesh. The guards shouted curses, but soon their voices were swallowed by distance and reeds. Layali gripped the boat's edge, heart racing. The city faded behind them, its lights like dying stars. They were fugitives now, rebels, blasphemers. But under the gaze of Sekhmet, they had chosen movement over chains, healing over silence. And though the Nile flowed quietly beneath them, destiny surged like a storm in the dark. The Nile stretched endlessly before them, a ribbon of silver beneath the stars. Each bend of the river whispered ancient stories, sung by wind and frogs and rustling papyrus. Layali sat low in the barge, her fingers trailing the cool water. She had left behind everything, her home, her name as it was known, even the fear that had once wrapped around her like chains. But the silence between her and Menmaatre had grown heavier, not with anger, but with questions. They docked at a small fishing village hidden within the delta's marshes, Khepra, a place where officials rarely tread and oaths were kept in the mud, not in stone. The village welcomed Menmaatre with quiet nods. A child he once saved now stood tall as a fisherman. A woman whose father survived plague by his hand offered them a straw hut near the water. But Layali noticed the glances curious, questioning. The villagers knew she was not kin. They didn't ask aloud, but the air carried the question, why her? That night, around a fire built low for secrecy, Layali finally spoke. Why me, Menmaatre? You could have saved many. You chose me. He looked into the fire for a long moment. Because the court takes and takes. But you looked back. Even as they led you to the palace, your eyes searched for your brother. That is not the gaze of a tribute. That is the gaze of a flame that refuses to die. She fell silent, his words resting against her like a hand on her shoulder. But the peace was brief. The next morning, fishermen found a papyrus scroll lodged among the reeds. It bore the red seal of Thebes. The tribute is missing. The healer is a fugitive. A bounty is placed. Gold for her return. Double for his. In an exile, the court's grip extended. Menmaatre burned the scroll. We move again, he said, no hesitation in his voice. But Layali was no longer a passenger. No, she replied, her voice calm but firm. We make them see. I was not given. I was stolen. And now I speak. In the village of Khepra, beneath the moon's solemn eye, a girl once offered as tribute began to shape a new path not just for herself, but for every name the court had erased. Khepra became their haven, but not their home. In shadows and silence, Layali and Menmaatre prepared for what neither of them had dared speak aloud: return. Not as fugitives crawling back to beg mercy, but as fire sent to scorch injustice. The court wanted her forgotten, but Layali had lived, and that alone defied their power. Menmaatre retrieved an ancient scroll hidden deep beneath the healer's satchel, a document older than Thebes itself. The Scroll of the Forgotten, he called it. A record of those given as tribute, sacrificed, erased. Layali's name was not the first. It was one of hundreds. Each name written in careful script, each age, each village, girls and boys, some as young as 9. Menmaatre had copied them in secret from temple archives, horrified by the pattern. They call it sacred tradition, he told her, voice sharp with buried rage. But it is theft, systemic, blessed by silence. Layali traced the ink with trembling fingers. The scroll felt heavier than any chain. "We show this to the people," she whispered. "Let them see what lies beneath the temple gold." The plan was dangerous, reckless, but truth always was. A caravan from Kepra was headed to Thebes for the annual river blessing. Layali and Menmaatre would go with them, disguised as grain merchants. The scroll would be copied onto smaller slips, hidden in amphorae, tucked into temple crevices, left in the markets. A silent uprising of ink and memory. Before leaving, Layali stood before the village, holding the scroll in both hands. "They named me Tribute," she said, "but I name myself Voice. This," she lifted the parchment, "is not just paper. It is the breath of those they silenced. I will not let them sleep quietly." The villagers, bound by fear for generations, looked at her with something deeper than admiration recognition. One elder stepped forward and whispered, "Then may the Nile carry your words farther than their gold ever could." And so, beneath the low moon and the endless hush of river reeds, the girl once destined to disappear stepped onto the path of rebellion. The scroll pressed against her chest like armor. Her name no longer Layali the Tribute, but Layali, the flame the court could not smother. Thebes shimmered in the morning light, its whitewashed walls and golden spires betraying no hint of the rot beneath. Layali entered the city not as a gift, not as a prisoner, but cloaked in coarse linen, her posture low yet her purpose high. Menmaatre walked beside her, head bowed, the scroll of the forgotten hidden in the false bottom of a grain jar. Around them, the river blessing festival had begun. Priests parading with lotus wreaths, dancers twirling beneath papyrus arches, nobles casting oil lamps onto the Nile in praise of Hapi's abundance. No one noticed the storm slipping through their gates. They moved through the crowds, planting the scroll's fragments like seeds. One inside a temple alcove, another beneath the statue of Maat. A third slipped into a mosque. Children hired with copper coins scattered copies across the market stalls. "The tribute is a lie," the notes read. "They take daughters, they erase names. The gods weep." Each one stamped with the symbol of Sekhmet, goddess of wrath and healing. By dusk, whispers buzzed louder than the drums. A priest stumbled upon a scroll fragment and paled. A noblewoman read one aloud at a banquet before the hush fell like a guillotine. Guards were dispatched. Temples were searched. But truth once spoken could not be captured. It had wings. In the alley behind the temple of Thoth, Layali and Menmaatre hid, listening. "They're reading them," she said, eyes glinting. "They're finally reading them." But Menmaatre was solemn. "Truth is dangerous, Layali. They'll come for us harder now." He was right. As the festival turned to night, torchlight flared not in celebration, but in search. The high priest stormed the inner sanctum, demanding answers. "Find the girl," he spat. "Find the traitor healer. Silence them before their lies spread." But it was already too late. The ink rebellion had begun, and for every scroll burned, another 3 appeared. In the morning, a tribute girl's name was carved in charcoal on a temple wall. Then another, and another. The silence had shattered. Hidden in a forgotten courtyard, Layali pressed her back against the cool stone and whispered, "They can find me, but they can't unsee what's written now." The court had made a mistake. They taught a tribute to speak, and now her words moved faster than their blades ever could. Thebes had not known such unrest in a generation. What began as scattered whispers turned into chants outside temple gates. The scribes had tried to erase the messages. The priests denied the scroll's origin. But the people remembered faces, names, offerings that had never returned. In every market and courtyard, Layali's defiance had ignited something long-buried doubt in the gods' appointed mouthpieces. So the court reacted with fury, masked as order. The high priest called for a public trial in the temple of Ma'at, the hall of truth and justice. They claimed Layali would be judged fairly under divine law. But no one was fooled. This was not justice. This was a spectacle. Menmaatre begged her not to go. "Let them rage from their thrones. The truth is already loosed." But Layali shook her head. "If I run now, they will turn me into a myth, a whisper. I will not be erased again." She entered the temple barefoot, head high, draped in a simple white robe that mirrored the linen of the day she was taken. The chamber was lined with judges and priests, their faces cold and unmoved. The scales of Ma'at loomed behind them, symbolic and silent. The chamber was filled nobles, merchants, servants, even workers from Kepra who had traveled days just to see if the rumors were true. The high priest began with venom. She defied the gods. She rejected tribute. She incited rebellion with false scrolls. But Layali did not tremble. "The scrolls are real," she said. "I was given to the court like cattle. I saw my name erased. I saw others vanish. This is not the will of the gods. This is the will of men in robes." A murmur swept the hall. One judge rose. "Do you have proof of this injustice?" Layali stepped forward and pulled a small scroll from beneath her robe. A fragment, a name. Not hers, another girl's, one who never returned. "This is all the proof I need." A name remembered. The hall was silent, and then a woman from the crowd wept aloud. "That was my sister." A man followed. "They took my cousin." No one ever spoke again. The court had summoned judgment, but the judgment turned its gaze upon them. And for the first time, the scales of Ma'at trembled with truth not handed down from above, but risen from below. By nightfall, the temple of Ma'at could no longer hold the crowd. What began as a trial transformed into an awakening. One voice had become many. Layali stood at the temple's center, no longer a girl given in silence, but a symbol reborn in truth. The high priest, pale and sweating, demanded order. "This is blasphemy," he roared. "You speak against the gods." But even the judges hesitated now. Too many names had been spoken. Too many faces remembered. The lie had unraveled. Menmaatre stood at Layali's side, no longer hiding in shadow. "You did this," he said softly. She met his gaze, steady as the Nile at flood. "No," she replied. "We did." When the guards were called to silence her, they hesitated. One, a boy from the workers' quarter, stepped back. Another dropped his spear. The priests had power, but not loyalty. Not anymore. That night, fires were lit, but not to destroy. Across Thebes, torches burned in vigil. Names of the lost were carved into walls, chanted in streets, painted on papyrus banners. Scroll fragments passed from hand to hand. The court tried to respond, declared the scrolls forgeries. Layali, a heretic. Menmaatre, a traitor, but truth moved faster than edicts. Villages stopped sending tributes. Mothers clutched their daughters tighter. Some temples even closed their gates. Priests unsure of their place in a world where silence was no longer safety. Layali did not return to Kepra. She stayed in Thebes, not as a healer or a rebel, but as a witness. The House of Life reopened under new hands, where no tribute would ever walk its halls again. Menmaatre, though marked, remained at her side. His punishment never came. The court feared turning him into a martyr. Years passed. A new queen rose, one who had heard Layali speak as a child in the temple square. She outlawed the tribute tradition, declared every name taken without consent sacred and every girl given away as a ghost to be remembered. And so, Layali's story was written not in scrolls, kept hidden in shadows, but in the open, for all to see, in stone, in song, in children who would never be stolen. She was given as tribute, but she chose not to vanish. She chose to fight, and in doing so, she became the fire they could never contain.